pleased to introduce Dr. Neil Hanlon, and he's Professor of Geography at the University of North British Columbia. His research looks at rural and remote health service provision, regional health governance, and community development efforts. So his work is really at the intersections of social and geographical gerontology. And so I'll turn the floor over to you, Neil. Welcome.
Thank you very much. All this technology, I hope it works. I'm being recorded too, so this is going to be great for my kids. Screw up the technology, but really I just wanted to start by saying thank you for inviting me here to be part of the event. This has been a great way to meet students and members of the community, faculty, and so on from McMaster and from Trent University. And it's been a wonderful experience. I'm delighted to be part of it and honored to provide the keynote address. And so hopefully I can deliver something that we can all sink our teeth into and think about how it relates to maybe the work that you're engaged in, because I'm very interested to hear all about that as well. So the title of my talk is Aging in Resource-Dependent Places, and I'll describe those types of places in the presentation itself. But the focus is going to be on the role of community development processes, and how that plays out and sometimes is overlooked. But I think is a very valuable element of adapting places to an older population. So by way of an outline then, I'll just say a few words about Canada's aging futures and how perhaps at a societal level we're starting to get our heads around responding to a different demographic reality, but also informing that work with good evidence and critical inquiry. And then I'll take us into this area of what we refer to as resource frontier aging. Aging in resource-dependent communities that don't have a lot of history of this type of pressure, and yet are responding. And particular challenges that are both common in these places, so challenges that will resonate with everybody here, but as well some unique challenges that have to do with the geography of the place. And then I'll take us through community development challenges and opportunities. So the opportunity or the ability for community development processes to be engaged to deal with some of these emerging challenges that are both unique and common. And a bit of a case study as well. I like little case studies, and one of my favorite places in the world, Tumbler Ridge BC. Probably never heard of it, but hopefully I'll drum up all kinds of tourism after this talk. Tumbler Ridge is a really fabulous place with all kinds of community spirit and I think a story worth telling. And then just to wrap up then with what all this means then for policy, but also for research, which I think is an important theme of our event today. So that's kind of where I'm going with this talk, and hopefully we get there. So we'll start with Canada's aging future. So some of you may remember back on a day early in the fall in 2015, if anybody still reads a newspaper, and I'm speaking here to the people under 30, newspapers are these things that are delivered to you. And probably that day, if it was the Globe and Mail or the National Post or one of these papers, there was probably a story about the fact that Canada had reached a demographic milestone. Statistics Canada had just put out a press release saying, as of July 1st of that year, seniors in quotes, so the population 65 and older, outnumbered the population under the age of 15. Right? So this was, great news, big news, flash news event. Of course, demographers and social scientists and people and all in these fields that we work with knew this was, on its way for decades and know why it was on its way for decades. But for the news outlets and for policymakers and so on, these milestone events are often triggers to get people to really focus their attention on a particular issue. And what did we learn? Well, from this coverage, of course, seniors are the fastest growing age group in Canadian society. But they're healthier than the seniors who've gone before. They're wealthier than the group who've gone before. They're more mobile as a group. They're more socially engaged. They have a different set of expectations. So the coverage was fairly good about this. It wasn't, that things were going to be different and so on. But I think as well, and maybe the coverage wasn't quite as good about the diversity of this demographic, culturally, socioeconomically, and geographically. And I think that's an area that we do have to keep in mind. The diversity of this group is not always one group that thinks and acts the same way and has the same experience. The Senate of all groups, the Senate of Canada, were ahead of the game in terms of starting to think about, broadly, how can we respond to this? So the Senate of Canada, under the direction of Senator Sharon Carstairs, who's now retired, struck a committee to look into, what kind of a national response could we be thinking of? How do we, as a nation, respond to aging, population aging? And this quote comes from the foreword of the report, and I think it's quite a useful one. So if we understand growing older to be a proxy for retreat from paid work, for physical decline and inactivity, and for increased dependence, well, then we have the makings of a crisis on our hands. But the generations that are now in the oldest age groups have charted a new meaning of growing older, and they've begun to retire the stereotypes of aging, setting out new and exciting ways of aging. So I think that that's a nice qualifier to put on how you start to think about responding to a broad social change like population aging. And I think that for the most part, I think policy responses have been quite attuned to this notion that things are going to be different moving forward. But nevertheless, adjustments will have to be made, policy adjustments to communities and workplaces and so on. And as well at this time, really the Senate Committee on Aging was kind of the first of a series of efforts to start thinking, hey, what about a national policy? So the Harper government and its senior secretariat had an action plan for seniors that it released in 2014. The Canadian Medical Association got into this game and said, it's not a disaster waiting to happen, but we do need to think about how we readjust the healthcare and physician workforce. Groups like the Institute for Research on Public Policy said, hey, we really need to start thinking about designing a national seniors policy for Canada, get the federal government and other senior levels of government involved, and start creating a framework for this. And most recently, and if you haven't had a chance to have a peek at this, the Alliance for a National Senior Strategy, which is an alliance of academics and policymakers and so on, stakeholders from across the country, but largely based here in Ontario, come out with their evidence-informed national senior strategy for Canada. And this is the wonderful sort of diagram that they developed to describe their policy. And really the pillars then of this structure are things like promoting independent, productive, and engaged citizens, healthy and active lives, providing care close to home, and then providing support for caregivers. A lot of the themes that we picked up on in our panel discussion earlier. So those pillars then about how you try to help older populations remain independent and engaged and as long as possible, and then when it's time, you wrap around that care and do all the things that we're supposed to do for that next stage of life if necessary. And then underlying or underpinning all of this would be a set of principles, values, or principles anyway: access, equity, choice, value, quality. And what they're really trying to do here is say, here's the role for the federal government. The time is right. The Trudeau government was just elected, and maybe it was Trudeau-mania part 2, right? This idea that perhaps this is finally the chance to get the federal government engaged in terms of its distribution of resources and support and so on, to build programs and services to help the provinces and the territories within the communities as well in supporting older populations. Now, at the same time, and this is something that we might have touched on earlier as well, that we've maybe all seen the age-friendly initiatives. The World Health Organization has been promoted, and the 8 arms, if you will: transportation, housing, social participation, respect, social inclusion, and so on, community support. All of those things that can be translated into a set of policies and procedures and so on at a local municipal level to make places more age-friendly. And a lot of the effort around the WHO efforts have been around, what are the best practices? Where can we learn from those places that are undergoing these transformations and responding to them, and thinking more inclusively and progressively about an older population and keeping that group engaged. Right? So we have the WHO initiative, the Global Age-Friendly Cities, where the emphasis is very much on policies, services, settings, structures, finding that right toolkit to support and enable people to age actively. The Public Health Agency of Canada took up the Canadian wing of this, and they've developed a set of guides and so on. And again, the emphasis is very much on partners, stakeholders, committees, councils, communication plans, action plans. So creating those structures, right, and saying, well, here are the structures, here are the things that need to be in place at a community level. And here, and we're learning this from some of the leaders in this area, some of the places that have already undergone an aging population, already started to think about how do we then recreate place to support a different type of population. The question that I have is, well, that's great, but is there anything that we can learn from places that are a little bit off of the beaten track here, that aren't really tapped in necessarily to these networks? They're small places, they're remote, and they haven't really been dealing with population aging for a long time. So in other words, what can we learn from the edge? And so my purpose, or my objective here, is to say there are things we can learn from the edge. And so I'm going to present some broad-stroked results and so on from the work that we've engaged with throughout northern BC, looking at how communities are starting, and residents themselves are starting to think about, hey, I'm getting older in this remote resource town. How do I stay engaged? How do I stay healthy? Who's going to help me? How's this going to work? Right? So what can we learn from the edge? What can we learn from places that are new to population aging, that are facing extreme economic and demographic pressures? There's not been a lot of growth in a lot of the places that I'm going to describe. Right? Populations, if they've grown at all, it's been marginally. A lot of them are stagnating, or they're losing people, and they're losing a lot of young people, and that's why they're aging. And they face all sorts of distinct service challenges: the small population base, the remoteness, lack of infrastructure, lack of an ability to support a broad range of services and choices, especially specialized services. And as well, the feeling of being absent or invisible to centralized policy makers. Right? We're just this little dot off in the corner of the map, and not a lot of people know what's happening. So this is the kind of environment then that I'm working in. And I want to draw attention to place-based efforts, in spite of all these pressures, to create a more supportive environment for older persons. So I love pictures, so lovely pictures of some of the places that I work in. Quesnel, which is just south of Prince George. Tumbler Ridge, you'll hear more about later, but it's up in the northeastern section of British Columbia. Prince Rupert out on the coast. It's one of the older communities. It's the end point of the Canadian Pacific Railway on the Pacific coast. And Williams Lake, BC. I don't know if anybody watches Timber Kings. Timber Kings is filmed probably just down the road here, just right around here. They produce all these log homes, and there are all these characters who It's HGTV, and they build. This is a great economic development coup.
I do know the show.
You do know the show, yeah. Well worth the effort. They're real characters, the guys who build these homes. And they take these big logs and they fashion them into beautiful log homes that they sell primarily to Americans. So you build them, and then you disassemble them, and then you ship them as exports, and they're actually raw log exports. They're not considered manufactured, funny enough, but then they're reassembled on site wherever they're being used. So interesting little economy. But anyway, Williams Lake. I could go on forever. This is a problem with just giving me an hour. Oh, and I'll tell you about Prince Rupert. There's all kinds of interesting things happening in these communities, and I love them. And but basically, you're looking at places where forestry is a big thing, some mining, minerals, and energy, transportation, distribution, a big part of the economy. Places like Rupert used to be big fishing communities. There's still a sector there. There's still people employed in that, but it's very much in decline. And now there's a lot of interest in tourism and so on. But they're struggling. And even if the industries are doing reasonably well, and they recover from recessions and so on, the recovery is a jobless one. So there aren't as many jobs in these sectors as there used to be. They're automating, mechanizing, and so on. And so a real struggle for the communities that who depend on the revenues and attracting workers and so on. Right, so we're talking about spatially remote, sparsely populated centers. They're dependent on resource extraction for the most part, mining, forestry, energy. And for our purposes as well, it's important to point out that they experience periods of really intense capital investment and population immigration. So they build a mill, they build some capacity or a depot or some kind of thing that's going to draw workers, attract workers. You need houses and schools and so on for workers and their families. All of these things come in boom periods, right? And there's this big expansion, and then followed by stagnation. You just sort of the communities and the industries mature, and sometimes they're renewed. Oftentimes, though, shuttered and things have changed and so on. So you have these intense periods where there's lots of building and new infrastructure, followed by the aging out of that infrastructure. And that's a really, really important part of the story of resource frontier aging. And they're small towns. They're purpose-built for industry and workers. And now those towns are changing. The industries aren't as central to the local economies and so on. And the population itself is changing. The social geography of these communities is changing and aging. So, I'll just take you through broad strokes about community development initiatives and the types of experiences that we've seen in many of the communities in the region where I'm based. And I have to show you a map. Oh, what happened there? Oh, good. All right. Rachel, you are not allowed to leave. All right. So this is, of course, a map. Geographer, it has to be a map. There have to be dots on maps and so on. This is not, there is no such thing as northern BC. Northern BC is whatever you decide. So I decided to count about 80% of the landmass of British Columbia as northern BC. You can make that argument, though, because this area here, as I say, 80% of the landmass, less than 10% of the population. Most of the population in British Columbia is in southern part of Vancouver Island, Greater Vancouver, and the Okanagan. Right? But all of this stuff is north of there, and you can't see it. The community of Hope is about here, and we like to joke often, once you're beyond Hope, you're beyond Hope. Right? In terms of what people recognize and where people have been when they visit British Columbia. All right, so it's a big, big area. Some of the communities, I'll take it sort of from east to west. So we'll start in the Peace District. So the Peace District is actually part of the Canadian prairies, right? So the Rocky Mountains cut through here, right? And this is like foothill and prairie areas. It's part of the oil patch, right? So they have some agriculture, some stagnating, ranching and wheat farming and so on. There's still a lot of that going on, but it's struggled for years. The big thing has been oil and gas development, and that's attracted. So it's one of the few places in northern BC that's actually attracted population. And the two biggest centers are Fort St. John and Dawson Creek. And when I say big center, Fort St. John, which is the big center in the northeast, is 26,000 people. And Dawson Creek, who always compete with Fort St. John, and would always vie, they're 11,000. They've fallen behind, 11,500. But those are the two big centers in the northeast. Right? These are not large cities. And I'm going to talk about Tumbler Ridge a little later. In the central interior, starting with where I'm based, which is Prince George. And Prince George is the biggest city that you're going to see here, 75,000. Right? So here in Southern Ontario, you probably just can't relate. What? That's the biggest place. That's the biggest place. And Quesnel, an hour and say a half south of Prince George, 10,000 people. There's 10,000 people in Williams Lake where they do the Timber Kings. And 100 Mile House, so named because it's 100 miles up the Caribou Highway, the Caribou Gold Rush Highway. There's something in the neighborhood of 2,000 people, I believe. Yeah, these are tiny little places, and these are the bigger centers. Right? And I know, because I grew up in Thornhill, Ontario. And to me, to go out there and not to have a continuous urban sprawl, you drive 10 minutes out of town and you are out town. There's woods, there's moose, and all this stuff. It's very different in northern BC. And out on the west coast, Prince Rupert, right out on the coast, about 12,000 souls. Kitimat, which is a plan town, was developed in the 50s. Alcan has a smelter there. They still have, well, not called Alcan anymore, Rio Tinto, but there's a smelting. So it's actually a very industrial town. And they had an agreement with BC Hydro, created a dam. They get energy rights. You need a lot of hydroelectricity to run an aluminum facility. And so that's a planned town. And it was like the prototype for BC's instant towns, which are the planned town communities. Of which Tumbler Ridge is an instant town. So it was developed in the 50s. Terrace, which is now the biggest center, Kitimat has about 8,000 people. Terrace, not too far away, about an hour up the road, is actually now the regional hub, and it's a service center. There's no industry there, but it does all the services and so on. About 10,000 people, I believe, no, 11,500. And Smithers, beautiful place, the PhD capital, more PhDs per capita in Smithers than anywhere else in BC, because the Ministry of Lands or something had their research offices there, and all these people with PhDs in geology and so on worked there and retired there and so on. So Smithers, 4 hours away from Prince George, is the sort of the gateway to the coastal mountain area. And I love size. I'll stay on time, I'll catch up, don't worry about it. If your kids have seen the buddies, space buddies and air buddies, the little the dogs and so on, that's filmed in Smithers. There's been a bunch of movies filmed in Smithers. There was a movie with Liam Neeson where he gets chased by these wolves and so on a few years ago. That was filmed in Smithers. Great spot, and they always dress it up to make it look like a northwestern United States. So there you go. So what you're getting though is a sense that these are scattered, small places over a very large territory. So here's some housing data that my colleagues and I have put together through Community Development Institute. So, and I moved from east to west basically here. And sorry, this is the proportion of the population. So they're aging, right? Up until the 1990s, nobody was really talking about seniors. There weren't a lot of seniors. So the expectation was, all right, they built a lot of these towns in the 50s and 60s. They lured all these people to work. And the expectation, the implicit expectation always was, you arrive at this place, you put in your 35 years with the company, you build up your nest egg, you sell your house, and you move somewhere nice and warm, like Victoria or the Okanagan. Well, a couple of things intervened, right? First of all, the downturns in the economy, you were lucky to survive the downturns, to stay. If you did because of seniority, there weren't workers there to buy your house when the time came. You had a bit of an equity trap. You didn't build up this nest egg because for everybody selling, for every 10 people selling a house, there's 2 new buyers. And so you have that kind of an element there, and the fact that in the Okanagan and Victoria and Court and Comox, the places everybody wants to be retired, all kinds of people are flooding in and buying properties, and it's unaffordable. So people are not leaving, they're staying. Seniors are not, as expected, they're actually staying around for a variety of reasons. And right around the turn of the 21st century, then you started to see demographically this playing out. So this is the proportion of the population aged 65 and older. That's the national average, around 14.5% in 2011. And you can see most of the places that represented in the lighter shaded green, there's only a couple of places where there's really a higher concentration of seniors. Most places it's below the national average in 2011, but the projections according to BC stats are in the darker figures. So the projections are 24% of the population by 2036. And now all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of places in northern BC that are actually have a higher proportion or projected to have a higher proportion. The change has been very rapid because of the out-migration and the aging in place. And so it's really, and what we did at the Community Development Institute early on, the 2001 census came out, we were able to show them, hey, this is happening, and this is what's coming for you next. And we really got them on board early to say, let's start preparing for population aging. People talked about pyramids before. 25 years ago, 30 years ago, a geographical gerontology meeting or the demographers get together, there'd be all kinds of population pyramids and so on. I know they're overdone. But this is a 100-mile house, and just for illustration. So in 1981, you can see that pyramid, the classic sort of pyramid shape, although the transition underway, right, where you've got the majority of the population under the age of 30. And fast forward to 2011, and it's quite a stark, but not just a rectangularization. It almost looks like Florida out there, where there's lots of seniors and so on. And that's the extreme, for sure. That is the extreme. But these transitions are underway, and now it's not so difficult to tell that story and to convince people. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was actually a bit of a challenge. People said, no, it's the seniors in northern BC. Right, so what are the challenges then that these communities face? Well, there's a whole bunch, and a lot of them are very common. They're common everywhere, that where aging is taking place. Most people are aging in place, and by that I mean within the communities that they're based. They might change residences within the community, but most people stay, right? Some people move somewhere else, but most people are staying put. And we're seeing that in northern BC. It wasn't the expectation 30 years ago, but that's what's happening. Is that by choice or is it constraint? Well, the equity trap that I talked about is not a choice, right? They've had to adjust their expectations because they can't afford to go to a retirement-friendly place. But there's also family and friends that keep you in place. There's a sense of home. And for a lot of people, they love where they live and they want to stay there as long as they can. And that's what's happening in northern BC. Challenges, risks of frailty and isolation. The real challenge is when people are living on their own, they might be widowed or maybe they never married, and they can't get out as much. They're living in housing that's not really suited to the new realities, and they can't maintain their properties very well, and so on. They become more invisible and so on. Well, that happens here, it happens in northern BC. And so all of those things are in play, and those are challenges that are very real in northern BC. And I would argue that ageism and ableism are challenges that are experienced everywhere. Right? This idea that we don't think about the fact that not everybody is able-bodied or the equivalent of an able-bodied young person, right? And you don't think about that. You don't think about that when you make decisions about how you run your business, how you build your infrastructure, and so on. And all of these things then become embedded in space and place. That's a problem in northern BC, it's a problem everywhere. But nevertheless, that's what these communities have to deal with. What's unique, though, I would argue, is the population challenges, the fact that not only there are small populations, but there are stagnant and declining populations in most cases. The spatial remoteness is a real challenge. There aren't a lot of options. If you can't get something in town, the next option might be hours away. And that is something distinctly unique in northern BC and other regions like that, remote resource hinterlands. And as well, the single purpose and the aging infrastructure, the big booms of the 60s and 70s. There haven't been a lot of new construction. It's very hard to, when a population is stagnated, to attract new investment in facilities and roads and housing and so on. So you've got a single purpose aging infrastructure that somehow has to be refitted to a changing demographic. And finally, I think as well, a pretty unique challenge would be the lack of institutional memory. It's new. And the decision-making that occurs in private businesses as well as in the municipal council haven't really, don't have that long institutional memory of concerns and ways to respond to an aging demographic. But in those challenges, though, are opportunities, and one of the things that we've picked up on in the communities that we study is a tremendous effort of community development. And by that I mean collective efforts to enhance local capacity of physical, economic, social, and cultural infrastructure. And this is achieved through networks and partnerships and leveraging and so on. And I would argue that it's a really key feature of smaller cities and towns, out of necessity. There's a certain necessity that if we don't do something about this, no one will. And that leads to this a willingness then to put in the effort, the work of doing community development. And I think it aligns very, very nicely with the healthy communities initiatives, the age-friendly communities, and those things that we're trying to achieve everywhere. And so maybe there's some lessons here in how they do things in these resource communities that really resonate well elsewhere. Intellectually or theoretically, these really resonate well with human ecology and this idea of a person-environment fit and an environmental press that occurs as people age and so on. And I think that's really valuable in terms of identifying those challenges. Where are the challenges? Well, they're in that mismatch then between the older persons and their environments. And that's where we need to put our efforts then in terms of adapting the environment, place. So there's a nice connection there with ideas that are widespread in gerontology literature. But I'd also like to argue that there's some geographic theories as well that I think are at play here. And in particular, the idea of place integration, which has been promoted by Malcolm Cutchin, who would have been here. He planned to be here. He's at Wayne State University now. It's too bad he's not, because I love to sing his praises and get people to talk to him, because he's doing some great work over his career on developing this idea of place integration, which refers to ongoing processes of adjustment and commitment and a sense of responsibility in responding to the problems posed by place. So people are always reevaluating themselves and their situations, their spatial situations as well as their social situations, who they are in relation to where they are. And then they act accordingly to try to align those better. And that effort, that work, then transforms places. But it also, in that sense, the place transforms persons. Right? So there's a reciprocity there. There's a recursiveness that is really, really valuable. People influencing place, but place influencing personal expectations and so on. And I think that's a really, really valuable theoretical point to pick up from these efforts. So, my partners in the Community Development Institute and myself have done a lot of work with communities throughout northern BC to think about, what are the issues? What are the things that we need to focus on, and what can we do? And so often what we'll do is we'll be invited to a community and who want to create a task force or something, and say, well, what can we do for you? Well, we can run some data, we can show you what's happening demographically and so on. We can, go and do an inventory of services and so on. One of the most important things that we do, though, and this comes back to some questions earlier this morning, is to do a survey. is to go and talk to, especially seniors, but everybody, and say, what are the needs? Where are the gaps? Find out what people expect. So doing community-based surveys, and the advantage of working in a town of 5,000 is you can do that. Right? You can get out there and distribute a survey to every household, and hopefully you get 20% back, but you can do something with it, that information. Right? So we do a lot of that, and we do a lot of interviewing and focus groups with service providers, municipal leaders, and so on, and seniors themselves, again, to give us this information that we can give back to communities, to help them think about how they can support an older demographic. And overwhelmingly, these are the areas that pop up as priorities. Housing, mobility, services, amenities, and activity. And housing is the critical, overwhelming. And so I'll sort of tie in some points about housing as we go. This is District 100 Mile House. They actually had the money to hire consultants and so on, but they found basically the same thing. I'm sorry you can't really read that too well. But the bars that are most frequently cited are the ones that I talk about. Housing is easily the most important issue that was identified. Right? And then you've got delivery services, home visit programs, safer sidewalks, safer routes for scooters and wheelchairs, and transportation. You pretty much could do the same thing here, and you probably get the same kinds of responses, right? So those are the challenges. How can you use community development then to meet those challenges? And I'll start by focusing on housing, because that seems to be the really central focal point, out of which then all these other things emanate. And when we think about what types of housing are available, most seniors live independently, right, where there's no services provided. And then at the other end of the other extreme end of the spectrum is the residential care, which we call long-term care here in Ontario, right, where you've got 24/7 services and supervision. And in between, you've got all these different steps: supportive housing, where there's a little bit of help with daily living and so on, and then more personal services and assisted living. Well, there's a lot of this kind of capacity in northern BC communities. There's a bit of this in the larger centres, quote-unquote larger, like Prince George and Fort St. John. They would have some residential care units and so on, but not a lot in between. And so the big community development effort is, how are we going to retrofit what we've got and then bring in new investment in supportive housing, assisted living. Very quickly, I'll just say, the housing stock is old, right? So these are all of our communities. The line, or the bars in light green, are the percentage built before 1980. And then this is all stuff built more recently. Right? There's not a lot of new construction. It was all built in the 50s and 60s, 70s, and it was all single family unit dwellings with a big yard, big driveway, right? And 3 and 4 bedrooms. And yet the demographic is changing. A lot of 1 and 2 person households, but not a lot of 1 and 2 person units or bedroom units. Right? So the mismatch here in terms of the need for smaller accommodation, and likewise you flip that on its ear in terms of all kinds of suburban style housing, family type housing, and not a great need for that. So there's quite a mismatch there, and there has to be different ways then to work with the stock that you've got. There's not much opportunity to build new housing. There's not going to be another big wave of construction. So you've got to work with what you've got to retrofit and so on. Subdivide. Right? And then what are going to be the future preferences in these places? Well, with an older population. Well, of course, you want a smaller yard, less maintenance, presumably. Home with less maintenance, fewer rooms to clean, fewer square footage, less space, and better design for mobility and security. And so accessible entrances, accessible interiors, wider hallways, and so on. Huge effort then to work with different groups to try to secure So new units, but then also to retrofit. And then use zoning and so on to try to attract developers to come in and help modify the housing stock that is available. And likewise, you think about all the things that need to be done to support people as they age in place, right? So to keep them at home as long as possible. So help with yard maintenance and minor repairs, housekeeping, home visiting. You need different type of emphasis in your community infrastructure. You have to pay a lot of attention to sidewalks and lighting, control, crosswalks, curb cuts, that kind of thing, parking, and then really critical is maintenance in winter. And again, those are efforts that are done through the municipal governments, but they're also done through volunteers and businesses. Transportation services, community facilities, accessibility, all of these things require cooperation, coordination between businesses, municipal government, but also volunteer groups and service providers. So within this, then, all of this is taking place. There have been quite a few efforts in the communities that I'm describing here. And I think that the focus on this and the ability to see the impact of this in these smaller centers is really, really valuable. Because these kinds of things, the kinds of things I've been describing, you could be talking about suburban Toronto, the place where I grew, Thornhill, and how you have to readapt, that environment built in the 50s and 60s, most of the housing was built in the 50s and 60s. And now that has to be redeveloped and reworked to accommodate an older population, changing population. Well, what I'm trying to suggest here is that in smaller places, in remote places, it's very, very visible. These efforts are extremely visible. Everybody's into everybody else's business in these places, and they know what's going on. And then when you go to create a task force, and when you go to create a group to say, let's do something about this. Say you recruit a physician. Say you recruit somebody from the rec center, somebody from the shopping mall, and so on. In places where there's only one or two of everything, you're getting really good connectivity, right? And they're focused in on the place itself, not just the neighborhood or a section of the city. Very, very visible. So this kind of stuff happens everywhere, but you can really see it in the kinds of communities where I study. And it's why you could argue that there's a greater potential for this crossing of boundaries, right? Because everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's facing the same challenges they can see. The neighbors are the ones, and they know their neighbors, and they want to help. Right? They want to do something about this changing demographic. But of course there's risks as well, especially in smaller places. You get civic burnout, people come and go, and then you lose that momentum, right? You have competing interests and of course resource scarcity. So I'm not trying to suggest that the leading edge is in the remote areas, but it's very visible and there's very pressing need. So going kind of a bit over, but I do want to talk a little bit about Tumbler Ridge, just because it's a place near dear to my heart. So who have I got here to tell me I can do that or not? Who wants to hear about Tumbler Ridge? All right, I got the thumbs up. Tumbler Ridge, right? Established in the early 1980s, the final instant town. There's about 7 of them, and this was the last one. So a planned town, and it was set up because of coal mine. A contract with Japan. There's steel makers in Japan. They wanted all this coal to be brought out of the region, so they set up a town. And they had what they thought was a big 40-year agreement, contract with the Japanese government. Almost as soon as the ink was dry, right, all of a sudden the Japanese were like, we want to rethink this. So it struggled right from the beginning in terms of the coal mining activity. So through the 80s and 90s, they grew to about almost 5,000 people, but the projection was, hey, this thing is going to be 10,000 people, right, by the year 2000. But they really peaked in the early 90s at 4,700 people. And in 1999-2000, 2 operating mines were gone, and they walked away. And the whole reason for the town is the coal. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. So they lost half their population. And over that period, then they had to think, well, people who stuck it out said, we love this place, we don't want to leave, and we want to save it. One of the things they did was they tried to do an Elliott Lake. They said, we got all this extra housing, some of the seniors who can't afford the Okanagan, why don't you come up here, and in the winter, when it's really bad here, all the money you saved on your housing, you fly off to wherever, right? Arizona or wherever it is. So they tried that, and they attracted a few hundred people. And those people made a big impact and spent money, and they helped stabilize things. So it was a success. It did help to sort of stabilize the place. But then, of course, you know, eventually the mines did reopen, and then closed again, and now they're going to reopen. So boom and bust. This is the reality, right? So it is an aging population, but really mainly through aging in place and the people who stuck it out. Net out migration of young people. They had a modest in-migration of seniors, and then now the older residents aging in place while others leave. Right? So it is an aging population, but only about 10% of the population, so nothing like you see here. It's the town hall, the town site itself in relation to the mines. Tons of capacity there, so if coal ever does return, and it has returned, there's lots of potential for the future for that. Let's move forward. Now, out of that big crash, out of that population crash, what was really interesting was that the people who stuck it out banded together, and they created things. Right? They engaged in community development. So Grids Fest, which is still an annual music festival in the summer, the long weekend in August, and it's a big deal. Pretty big acts come in all the way to Tumbler Ridge, and it's a weekend festival. That was created after the mines closed. So they developed this thing and said, come to this place where the industry has left us. And through voluntary initiative and so on, they've kept that running. Our Arts Council, an umbrella group that's been there from day one, saying anybody interested in arts, you've got to make this place livable. No one's going to do it for you. And so you have to do it through voluntary effort, because no one's going to do this for you. Tremendous trails, waterfalls, scenery, and so on. So they have a vibrant Nordic mountain society. And these are the people who discovered all these dinosaur tracks and fossils that have now attracted all kinds of international attention. And Tumbler Ridge is now a UNESCO Global Geopark. All of that was done through voluntary effort to bring experts to say, can you confirm for us that we've got this amazing store of fossils and footprints and so on that are of scientific interest, that are of value for education and so on. So Tumbler Ridge has a geopark designation, a UNESCO geopark designation. So it's used for research. There are 2 full-time paleontologists from the University of Alberta based in Tumbler Ridge, and they have got a whole career worth of things to sort through. So dinosaur tracks, they take molds, huge molds of these pathways, trackways, casts, they pull them up, they have to ship them by helicopter to a museum, and they're stored for research, and they're published in leading paleontology journals and so on. You can use these for summer camps for the kids in the summer. People travel to Tumbler Ridge in the summer to send their kids to a dinosaur camp. And all of this was done after the place almost crashed, almost died. All through voluntary effort. The museum itself was the key player in collecting this stuff. They turned a school that was closed because of the loss of population into the museum. So you work with the infrastructure you've got. So you've got a culture of community development in Tumbler Ridge out of necessity, right? And so they promote the place now as you know, this amazing place, and it really is a beautiful place to visit. And there's the museum. One of the key things about this, though, is that this character here, you can't really make it out too well. He's in a cowboy hat and everything. He's part of this riding club in town. You guys would like to ride around. They have a poker night. And they collect money. They collected $500 from their poker night to help the museum. And it's very typical in Tumbler Ridge, where groups help each other out with whatever they're doing. You think, well, that's an odd combination. Cowboys and museums. But they recognize, hey, this is important for the community, to stabilize the community, to keep people here. And it's very typical of what happens in Tumbler Ridge. Now, the other thing that the community development group there, the culture, achieved was to help Tumbler Ridge Age, or to help support aging in place. Right? And so they created a task force. We helped them with the data collection and surveys and so on. I created this task force and then had an action plan coming out of that. They have services for seniors, so Seniors Corner is like a drop-in center at the community center. The Tumbler Ridge Hospice and Respite Care Society. Tumbler Ridge Cares is a shuttle service to help people travel to communities, and everybody benefits from that. So if you have a medical appointment in Dawson Creek or Fort St. John, there will be a shuttle service to drive that 1 and 2 hours away in the winter to get people to their medical appointments that they can't have done or look after in Tumbler Ridge. And that's all volunteers, and they just cobble together whatever they can through contracts and so on. All done by volunteers. Everybody benefits, but certainly it's there to, in particular for the seniors. And as well, this is Janet and George Hartford. They have a seniors residence named after them, so they managed to get the community, and George in particular was part of this effort. He's the former mayor. And these are 2 teachers who moved to Tumbler Ridge when it was open, and they stayed. And they have left a huge imprint on the place through community development. So Janet was interested in gardening, and now there's a community gardens named after her because she was head of the Garden Society for years. George was in municipal politics as well as being an educator, and they left an indelible mark on the place, right? And so they're there, and they named the 12-unit housing unit that they created. So they needed some housing, smaller housing for seniors, close to where all the services and amenities were. And they were able to do that. They were able to convince BC Housing to invest in Tumbler Ridge, even though the place was losing population and so on. Right? So through all of this, then, well, what are we seeing here in Tumbler Ridge? Well, Tumbler Ridge draws on a culture of volunteerism that's widespread. Right? So it's not just for seniors, but it draws on all the skills and the routines and the normalcy of volunteerism in Tumbler Ridge. Everybody's facing common challenges, and it's the future of the town. So that really gets people together. And very open-mindedness about who you work with and who you partner with. Contingencies that you really can't plan. And out of this, then, we have seniors being both agents, because they're an important part of the volunteer culture, but also recipients of community development. And through this community development, you can see the possibilities for reimagining place and identity. You know, from this productive coal mining place to a place of consumption, nature, dinosaurs, education, and so on. From a planned town to an improvised town, a place where it's grassroots. And from this remote place to a connected place. UNESCO heritage, bringing the world to Tumbler Ridge and so on. Tumbler Ridge Cares, mobility service. So in all of this, then, I think there are really important lessons then when we come back to this idea of global strategies, national strategies, and so on, versus the place-based activity, the work of community development. And I think what really we have to emphasize here is that those are not separate processes. They should be connected. What you learn in place should inform global strategies, and the global strategies should make a lot of sense to what's happening in place. And as well, I think working in these areas really helps us conceptually to challenge dualisms and fixed categories. And going back to some of the comments Stephen raised earlier, right? What's old, what's young, what's central, local, and so on. And what is independent, what's vulnerable. And I think what you see here is you can be both, right? You can be vulnerable, but also independent and entrepreneurial and so on. And to embrace relationality. So there's local, global connectivity networks. It's a really important way forward. And intersectionality. And so really just the idea that place integration is achieved through community development. You can transform people and places. But this is an ongoing process. It never stops. And so the warning here is that you always need support for this. And this is where the global policy piece comes in. You need resources that are shared and redistributed globally for support and renewal of these efforts. And so I'm right at time. I apologize. A couple of things, so I just wanted to acknowledge. My co-authors in some of this work, Mark Skinner, Alan Joseph, Laura Reiser, and Greg Halseth from UNBC, the UNBC's Community Development Institute. And I want to thank Amanda for, where is it? I want to thank you for coordinating everything. I want to thank Rachel for saving the presentation, the PowerPoint, and Justin as well has been